Morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Menopause Collective with me, Sarah Utley, your host. And today is all about breathing. And on average, a human being will take 670 million breaths in our lifetime. That's roughly 25,000 inhales and exhales a day. And research has shown that things like asthma and anxiety and ADHD and other maladies could really be reduced by or reversed by simply changing the way we inhale or exhale. So the missing pillar in health is breathing. And to tell us more about the importance of breathing is Jane Tarrant, who is my guest today. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome on this amazingly hot, beautiful, bright, sunny day.
Exactly, just my style.
So, Jane, tell us a bit more about you and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Jane Tarrant and I'm the founder of Link Breathing, and I'm a breathing retrainer and awareness coach. I could not be more passionate about what I do. I just absolutely love it. Can't stop me talking about it, even if you're not being paid. And basically, what I'm really passionate about is the basic education on it, is getting to the masses this concept of we haven't been taught how to breathe. And a lot of the education we think we know about breathing is actually miseducation or misinterpreted. For example, take a deep breath is seen as, by most people, a chance to take a big breath. But if I said to you, this is the deepest ocean in the world, you wouldn't therefore think it's the biggest ocean in the world just because it's the deepest. But when it comes to breath, we kind of misinterpret that completely. So when we take a deep breath, it should be deep, literally right down into the lowest part of the lungs. And that's where just these very simple things are completely misunderstood. And therefore we try to do something that's good for us. It's not always as good as it could be. So that's the first little bit. Then it's a case of taking control of our nervous system, taking control of our body. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we have a huge amount of control, and it's like a superpower. We might dream of having superpowers as kids or adults, but when we have something inside us already that can literally control our nervous system, your heart rate is going out of the world, and you're hot flushing or you're panicking or you're breathless, and just everything feels like really high state of stress in the body. But we have the power to just step in and be like, I know how to do this. Let's just crack on and bring it down. And yet most people don't have that confidence in themselves, in their body. And it's something that I didn't know either. And I'm just so glad that I've come across it. And now I get to basically teach people all the time how to feel empowered to take control when they need it, which is amazing. And not just when it's a panic attack or when it's an asthma attack or when it's a hot flush, or not just in these moments, but also, what do you do before you get to those moments? How do you know that you're at the space you can do something about it? Or how do you know you're getting towards an area you don't want to be? In which case, it's a case of knowing how to read the body, the signals, and that's where the awareness side comes in. So it's the breath, but also the awareness that you get through breath, which is really empowering. I was personally a mouth breather for pretty much my whole life. Age 7, my nose felt too small. And I remember sitting in my bedroom, age 7, thinking, my nose feels too small. I can't really breathe through it very well. Like, I can breathe through it, but it doesn't feel enough. And then I switched to my mouth. And I'll go into later kind of why that is and what impact it has. But I just didn't know that there was support. And I think if I told my parents back then, I don't think that the doctors would have known. I don't think most doctors now know. I think it is a case of there's so little education in this space, and yet if we know the basics, we can have massive change in our lives.
Well, I can tell how passionate you are, and I can see that. And you mentioned at the age of 7, you kind of knew that there was something not quite right, and so started breathing through your mouth. What impact did that have on your health?
Well, the interesting thing is you never really realize how suboptimal you are until you make an improvement. So the greatest thing is, I can't say that I was like I wasn't having chronic fatigue. I wasn't having sort of anything really, really major to the point I would have gone to a doctor and done something about it or tried to do something about it. I was just suboptimal. I was always tired. I was always feeling like I was being held back in sport. So although I was like pretty much the sportiest person in my whole year, I was on every team, I was always, I had to turn up to every school match, otherwise I was told off because I was needed. And so it was like, I was really, really good at sport and I was really fast. I was even as fast as the boys in the bleep test. But I really struggled with the breathing. I was heaving with the breath. I couldn't calm down as quickly. I'd often find in hockey matches I was struggling to really actually keep up the pace for as long as an entire match was. And I found that I would just feel very tired afterwards, and my muscles and everything would take a long time to recover. I'd often then not feel like I had enough energy to eat, and therefore then it's a bit of a cycle really, with not enough food in and not enough of oxygenation to the body as well. So that was a really big area for me personally. I also started having panic attacks at age 12, and that's a really key age because obviously hormones are changing, and we start to actually feel a bit more stressed by life in certain areas, or if you have an episode. Mine was actually triggered by a particular episode that was a bit like, oh gosh, I've got to run and get help, and it was perceived by the GP as a sport-induced asthma. So that's what's on my medical records now. So because I was running at the time to get help, they perceived it as sport-induced asthma, and therefore I was sort of labelled as sport-induced asthma, need an inhaler, had the blue salbutamol inhaler, and therefore when I went to matches, I would freak out if I didn't have my inhaler, if I hadn't taken it, because I was like, oh, I need this inhaler, I had sport-induced asthma, as opposed to going, I'll see, I'll just go, and if I can't breathe, then I'll, learn how to breathe better, which would have been a much better way of doing it. And so because I was a mouth breather, you often get that sort of forward head posture as well, so really crane the head neck forward to try and create space in the airway, because by breathing through your mouth as a child, your tongue is in the bottom of your mouth, which means it's not in the roof of the mouth pushing out the sort of teeth to widen the face and develop the face. Imagine like a brace. You're swallowing, which mine was incorrect. Mine was swallowing forwards, like a forward thrust swallow. And I was also breathing with the tongue at the bottom. And so my face went really narrow, really triangular, the chin back, and massive overbite, and just felt that everything felt a bit smaller. So that impacts the nasal cavity, which is why obviously sometimes the nose can feel even smaller than it should do, and then small at the back. And then I would snore. I was always a snorer as a kid. So lots of things like this, and heavy breather, like Darth Vader. That's what my husband used to call me when we first got together. Like, actually, no, before we got together, when we were friends, and I'd sit there watching a film, I'd be like, it was just really heavy, and even when I was completely at rest, and it shouldn't be loud and heavy at rest. So there's lots of little tiny things, and none of these are ones where you go, oh, I'll go to the doctor, I've got a real problem. And yet all of these impact every part of your life, the quality of your sleep, how refreshed you feel in the morning, how focused you feel. And I did find that when I started to retrain my breath, I was like, oh wow, I'm no longer feeling additionally tired if I go for a walk. And I was feeling particularly tired at that point from sleep deprivation from a child and all this sort of stuff. So when I did retrain, it was like, it's not just the breath, it's everything else that we're not doing for ourselves, not eating properly, not sleeping properly, etc. But if the breath is also bad, you're plummeted. Whereas if you can bring some of them up, it sort of helps to balance out a little. And who isn't sleep deprived sometimes, especially as parents.
Oh yes, or going through the menopause. Yes.
Or that, exactly. So it's these basics. I think when I realized the impact it had, it was then that I was just like, this is my future. Why wasn't I told this? Why didn't I know how to control a panic attack? Why didn't I know how to calm myself down in a stressful situation? Why didn't I know how to read my body? Why didn't I know that my menstrual cycle would affect me? And it's just been every day I just learn something new about myself, and it's so exciting.
So you had some conscious awareness when you were a child about breathing and this unhealthy relationship with your inhaler. At what point in your life did you think, I need to do something about this? Or, you went to have breath retraining. Was there a trigger at that point in your life? And what was that?
So the sad thing is I actually gave up sport eventually.
Oh.
When I was 15, I went to a different school. There was sort of less interest for me in doing it because I didn't have that team mentality. And I just thought, well, I struggle. And actually I used to love sport. Like I really craved it if I didn't do it, but I just sort of dropped it. And then I took up things like climbing, rock climbing, which doesn't get you out of breath, because I didn't like the way I felt when I was out of breath. And so I actually just stopped doing it, and that's not good for me. And it's not, it's not been a good thing for me in terms of managing stress and other things as well. Not having that aerobic exercise for a good 15 years. I didn't really properly exercise to the level I could have done, that I was capable of. I was really fit. So that was the sad part, that it actually made me give up something I enjoyed. Not necessarily really consciously, but it was kind of part of it. And then going for a walk up a mountain with a friend, like, I mean, they would be going up the mountain and I'm like, can we stop again, because I'm really struggling here. And that was the sad bit. So the reason I actually ended up retraining was not because I sort of realized there was a problem necessarily. It was because I was listening to a podcast once that said, did you know it's possible to retrain your nose? And I was like, what? So during it, I tried nose breathing, and I noticed sort of I was feeling a little lightheaded or feeling just a bit odd. And I thought, but I can nose breathe. If I really make myself do it and I have my tongue in the right place, actually it is easier than I thought it was. And they're saying I don't need to take lots of air. I don't need to overbreathe. And I'm an overbreather. So actually, if I believe that and I trust that and I go with it, look what I can, this is really interesting. I never realized this was possible. For some people, it's even harder than that. Even those first few breaths can feel really hard. But for a lot of people, you say breathe through your nose for a minute, they think they can't, but actually they can. As long as they sit with the uncomfortableness that it might bring. And then with time, that uncomfortableness will go. They'll start to actually feel like this is normal. Oh, okay, great. And so for me, it was just this knowledge of like something I thought was an issue since I was 7. Finally, I've got some light on it. And as soon as I learned that, I just literally learned everything I could, set up my business, got cracking, got working with people, and just learned everything I could. And so much of what I've learned has been from initially clients I work with for free, and then onto paying clients. And everyone I work with teaches me something about a new condition or a new ailment. And the breath concept is the same. We're just trying to teach them how to breathe properly, but you add it into what it does for their ailment, and every day I'm like, whoa.
Incredible. So what impact has breath retraining had on you personally?
For me, it's given me a huge confidence in my body. I think that the first time I ever really trusted my body and believed in my body was when I gave birth. And that then made me intrigued by my body, to what else is it capable of that I have maybe underestimated. I've always thought of myself as someone who's weak, or would get tired out easily, although yes, I still can get tired out easily because I'm super excited and maybe overdo it sometimes. I always felt that maybe my body wasn't up to the job of living well, and I don't believe that anymore. So that was a really big one, as starting with birth and then looking into these other areas of my life, my menstrual cycle, my breathing, changing my diet. And by changing that breathing, it's given me this huge awareness of where my body's at, what sort of boundaries I need in my life to protect me from unnecessary stresses, unnecessary anxiety, unnecessary pressure, and unnecessary energy expenditure, that we give so much. I think so many people are like this, they give and give and give. And although that's very admirable, you can't give from an empty cup. And if you don't know how to fill it up, then you've got a serious problem. So that for me has been a major one. And then secondly, just feeling like I don't lose my body at difficult times. One of the ones that I really find important for me is I used to lose my nose, in the sense of like went from not really using it very much, mostly in my mouth, to couldn't use it at all, completely stuffy, bunged up, trying to use sinus sprays and really painful behind. And I don't get that anymore. I trust my body. If it gets congested, I know how to naturally decongest. I know how to make sure that if I can't breathe well, I do the decongestion technique, and then I'll be able to breathe again through my nose, and that I can wait the 30 seconds or whatever I need to while I'm struggling. I don't need to breathe for 30 seconds. I can just literally go through. And that's been incredible, because now, colds from my daughter, for example, they're always passing over colds, children are. And so you don't want to spend half your life basically going, oh, I just feel awful, I'm just going to go through my mouth. You want to think like, no, I've got this, I'll keep my nose. And I haven't lost it in over a year and a half, despite multiple colds and COVID. So yeah, that's been pretty cool.
Jeez. Wow. Okay. So we are a nation of mouth breathers and over breathers. So I hear.
Yeah.
So I read.
Much. Definitely over breathers, about 50% mouth breathers, maybe, judging, but over breathers especially, even through the nose.
So what is over breathing?
Over breathing is basically breathing too much for the situation. So if I sit here in a chair and I'm breathing like, with visible shoulder movement and really loud, hard, fast. I mean, even you could tell me that that's over breathing with, with very little knowledge potentially on breathing. Even not necessarily you have a bit more knowledge than most people, but do you know what I mean? So if somebody's obviously doing that, you can tell they're over breathing for the situation. However, some people do naturally just breathe like that heavily, and that's just, well, that's how I am, that's my condition or whatever. And otherwise it's a case of this hard and fast or very shallow. So this sort of upper chest movement, especially. I don't have any upper chest movement when I breathe now, but I used to. I didn't understand how my diaphragm worked, and getting that change is incredible from a point of tension, that feeling of you're breathing up into the chest, whether it's through the nose or not. How many women do you know with their upper chest movement? Probably most of them. And we're restricted by bras, by tight jeans up around the waist, funny belt things, nipped in dresses, like lots of different clothing that's very restrictive. And so at complete rest, you actually can wear quite restrictive clothing and still be fine if you're not an overbreather. But if you are an overbreather, it goes straight to the chest. For me, I can be quite nipped in now, and because I breathe with my diaphragm in a very small way and I can cope with less air, then I can just about get away with it. But you go on like to have to run for a bus or something, oh gosh, you haven't got the movement that you need. So when we're over breathing, it is a case of too loud, too high up in the chest, too shallow, and just too much, too fast. So what we try to do is we try to slow that down, and that is easier said than done if you've got no awareness. And therefore it's all part of the training, is actually finding the awareness you need through the different techniques, learning about your tongue, learning about your nose, learning about your diaphragm gradually, and finding that over a period of time it does actually completely change how you breathe. Your upper chest can stop breathing, it could stop moving, your diaphragm can come in, and your nose feels totally fine, even though it felt too small.
So over the years, and I'm talking hundreds, maybe thousands of years, our faces have changed shape. As you said, they become more pointed, teeth become more out of shape, tongues are not on the roof of the mouth, which is what you really do need to breathe properly. And a lot of that has to do with diet and chewing.
Yeah.
Can you talk through the evolution of why we have become more overbreathers and more mouth breathers, and why chewing and facial shape has got such a lot to do with breathing?
Absolutely. So, a really good place to read about this is actually James Nestor's book, Breath, which, as you know, you've read, it's amazing. But the basics of it are the way we live is affecting our breathing. So it's not that humans have necessarily changed alone, it's that they've been changed by their habits, and habits are always either positive or negative, because it depends on which direction you're going. When we look at habits, it's a case of things like, breastfeeding, for example, I am totally there with the fact that not every parent can, or every mother can breastfeed. It's not always possible, but there are benefits to breastfeeding, as we know, and one of them is the strengthening of that suck. So whereas on a bottle it's not the same, it doesn't have the strong suck that breastfeeding does. So therefore, if you don't breastfeed, then you've lost that. However, it doesn't mean you can't get away with it. It means that, well, what about chewing? If you're not doing it through the sucking, then now you're doing it through the chewing. But then you give your baby pureed food. And then you give your baby or your child, mashed potato and really cut up meat and processed food and, all this sort of soft stuff and smoothies. And then they go into an adulthood and then can't really, I can remember thinking, I just can't be bothered to chew. Like, it's a lot of effort, and my facial structure was all not in a great state. So, chewing, I'd actually get quite tired in the jaw from chewing. And, even now, I've got such a strong overbite, my alignment is not good. And I live with that at the moment. And I'd love to do my next stage of looking at myofascial therapy and actually looking at what I could change and maybe having braces again as an adult once I'm in the point where I want to kind of document it. But this state of how we chew and whether we're using our face to develop it, strengthening it, is incredible. And we can even improve that as adults. If you start chewing, well, now you can actually improve your facial structure in terms of bone density and things like that. But so that's the first one, is whether we're doing those. The other one is we're in hot houses. So the hot houses can then cause the congestion, and because we don't know what to do with congestion because we haven't been educated on it, we then just switch to our mouth, and then our tongue drops, and then our tongue is in the right place for our teeth development up until we're about 12. That's when our teeth are generally developing. Or as an adult, we just start to overbreathe, and then we start to feel more anxious or more stressed or more dry mouthed or more dehydrated and more brain foggy and tireder. And so you've got all these little things just from increasing the heat of our homes the whole time. Pets in our bedrooms especially, but pets in the house. We didn't used to have pets in the house, and now we've got all this dander that's stuffing up our nose again and making us mouth breathe and making us have asthma attacks and all these sorts of things. So there's lots of little tiny things that we have, including posture. So if we're slumping on a sofa, we're impacting our diaphragm because we're not able to actually move it properly. We're not thinking about it moving properly. We're not actually aware of the fact we can't move it properly. And therefore we're getting, micro things, whether it's playing on a Game Boy, Nintendo, Xbox, whatever it is, that's a new thing, whether it's hunched at your computer, the laptop over the dining table, on the sofa in the evening. How many of us really think about posture? Unless we're sat on a bolt upright chair, and even then it's uncomfortable because most of us are quite weak. We can't even hold up our own core to sit nicely, and we never sit on the floor because we're just not used to doing that. So we're not using our entire body in a way it could do. And these things really, really matter in terms of how we're going to breathe throughout the day. So through the breathing retraining, you start to notice these other habits that you're doing and how much impact it has, and it can then make a massive difference. But we're just clueless. Me also for most of my life. So I think if we can change that education and change the fact that we understand the habits we've got, but we can actually work with them so we don't lose our nose and lose our diaphragm, then we can still enjoy modern life without going back to cave living, but equally in a slightly better way.
It's about raising awareness and bringing into conscious awareness some of those habits, as you've said, and then having choice about what you do differently. Yeah, very important. I've certainly become more aware of breathing through my nose and how congested it feels. And I think some of that relates back to a histamine intolerance that I've developed as part of perimenopause. And often histamine can block up your sinuses, and being consciously aware of how I can decongest my nose and how I can get a fuller breath by breathing through my diaphragm has been quite impactful in terms of how I manage my menopause symptoms, which we will come on to. But in my naivety, when I was starting researching about breathing, and when I started reading James Nestor's book, it's all about oxygen. I thought breathing is all about oxygen. And what shocked me is it's not all about oxygen. I'm actually going to read a bit from a quote from the book, which I just found absolutely amazing. A researcher from Yale called Yandel Henderson said carbon dioxide is the chief hormone of the entire body. It is more fundamental component of living matter than oxygen, which if you think about the hormonal changes in menopause, if we think of carbon dioxide as a hormone, well, that opens up possibilities to really be more impactful and to really make some positive changes that are in your own control through your breathing to help with menopause symptoms. So can you tell us a little bit about carbon dioxide and why it's so important for breathing?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics. So carbon dioxide, I'm going to basically do this in really simple visual science because it's often the nicest way to do it. And plus I hate high level science, so let's stick with the simple stuff. When you've got carbon dioxide, it's the waste gas in your body. So it's the oxygen comes in, we convert it into carbon dioxide or CO2, and then we breathe it out. So most people just think it is only a waste gas. But the truth is that it has a job to do before it leaves the body. Now, when we have good levels of carbon dioxide in our blood, we find that as the oxygen comes into the lungs, it goes through in like a tree into the leaves of the tree, and each leaf is wrapped with capillaries so that it can go into the blood. When the oxygen goes through into the capillaries, it lands on the little red buses. So imagine little red buses, which are hemoglobin, if anybody is actually interested in science. These drive towards your brain with oxygen as passengers. When they get to the brain, if there's lots of CO2, the blood vessel is wider. And so you can get like 3 buses side by side, like a motorway. And then the CO2 or the carbon dioxide is then like porters. They stand outside, they open the doors, and they let all the oxygen off into the brain. So all 3 buses go into the brain. Then the CO2 gets on the bus, finishes its shift, and goes off back to the lungs and gets breathed out. So great, yeah. Problem is, if you are an overbreather or having a panic attack or feeling particularly anxious, or are having a hot flush and freaking out, what you're doing is you're sort of dumping CO2 at a really high level. You're it's absolutely being thrown out of your body, and it's not staying in to do its job. So yes, there'll always be some in the body, obviously, to function, but what happens is those buses start to stack. So they've picked up the oxygen. You still managed to have some oxygen in your lungs, but you're going round and they're now one behind the other. So it's like a single carriageway. And when they get there, there's less porters on duty. So they don't open all the doors, they open some of the doors. So not only have we not got 3 buses at a time, we've actually not emptied all the buses either now. So your brain is functioning barely. And that's why you're getting that brain fog and that lack of clarity and that feeling of panic, and you can't really think clearly or do anything, or like, and it becomes even worse because you just haven't got your brain working optimally at that moment in time. When you can get to that point and you realize, oh, it's all about the buses and about the CO2, then you can start to understand why you would change your natural reaction to breath. So the natural reaction to breath is to breathe more. If you feel breathless or you struggling, it's that and trying to get more oxygen in. But you need to know that you've got plenty of oxygen in your body. If you put a pulse oximeter on your finger, you would be like 95 to 99% oxygen most of the time. And yes, it might dip slightly, but generally it won't. And when you've got oxygen not coming in, it actually gives an opportunity for the CO2 to also not go out, which means that then widens everything. And then the doors get opened, and then the oxygen gets off, and then you'll get more oxygen to the brain, which then helps you to then breathe again, which is amazing. So by changing how we breathe in that scenario, we are impacting that very basic science of oxygenating the cells in our body that need it.
Wow. So the magic question is, how can you get more CO2 in the body when it needs it most?
It's not so much getting it into the body, it's stopping it escaping the body.
So keeping it in the body.
Exactly. So slowing down your breath, reducing your breath, stopping your breath if necessary. If somebody happens to be pregnant, they shouldn't do extended breath holds. For anybody else, it's generally quite safe unless you've got a severe condition that you've been told by the doctor not to do something like that. So when you have just a moment of pausing your breath or slowing your breath right down, you are reducing that CO2 from leaving, in which case you're allowing it to do its job. Now, there is a problem here. And this is a bit where breathing retraining becomes relevant. So you've got normal, healthy breathing. Great, anyone can do that, unless you can't. And the unless you can't bit is where the CO2 tolerance has been reduced. So we all have a CO2 tolerance. We can sort of tolerate a certain level in our body, and then it gets to a ceiling, and then we get a and we suddenly want to breathe, right? So if we feel like we're exercising and therefore we're making more CO2 in our body, we will want to breathe more because we're exercising. But we also, if we hold our breath, we'd get to a point where eventually we suddenly want to breathe in and get more what we think is oxygen, which, yes, it is. It's a bit like the canary in the mines. It's a bit like a trigger. So the CO2 is there to basically trigger our bodies to tell us we need to breathe, because we could be running out of oxygen if we don't start breathing. But the problem is, when you are an overbreather, you train that down. So you then need to breathe too quickly. And somebody who is not an overbreather, they'll be much more able to slow their breath rate down, to minimize their breath, to get to that motorway all the time. Somebody who's an overbreather will never get past the dual carriageway. They'll never feel the full benefits, because they actually can't take as little breath as that. They can't slow it down that much. They can't use their nose. They can't hold their breath. They can't do anything that actually increases the CO2 to the level that they could do if they weren't an overbreather. And that's where the training comes in, of if you can help somebody change everything from their tongue position to getting their nose working, to getting their diaphragm working, to getting it controlled, if you can slow it down, reduce it down over a period of time, which I usually do in a few weeks, then you can get that CO2 level tolerance to actually be like, right, yeah, I can tolerate one nostril breathing, or not breathing for a few seconds, or whatever it is that that person uses to measure the difference that they can feel in their body.
And what are the benefits of having more CO2 in the body, other than, opens blood vessels, takes more hemoglobin and oxygen to all the parts of the body? What are the benefits?
I mean, there will be loads of benefits. I don't go into too much, because the reason being is the science gets too complicated for most people. But there will be lots of other benefits to doing this. And I don't try and look at the whole body. What I try and look at is just focusing on the basics of, can we improve how our cells are being oxygenated? That's the main thing I'm interested in, because if we can do that, then we'll get the benefit of having oxygenated cells and whatever that impacts. If we go into the really, really high level science, you'll lose everyone. But when we're looking at things like menopause, which you particularly obviously are interested in, perimenopause, that's where it becomes quite interesting, because I'm just going to take this book here, The Perimenopause Power by Maisie Hill, which both of us love, obviously.
Yes.
There's something in here that says those with moderate to high levels of anxiety experience 3 to 5 times greater frequency and severity of hot flushes when compared to those who had lower levels of anxiety. Now, if you're an overbreather, you're more likely to have higher levels of anxiety. So if we can nip in the bud the overbreathing to deal with the anxiety, then that can have a knock-on effect in terms of the other. Now, the interesting thing about science is it's all on hypothesis and general kind of like testing and what we think it means. They're sort of saying, is it the anxiety that's affecting the hot flushes, or the flushes that are affecting anxiety? Is it a bit of both? Our body is generally a bit of both. It goes back and forth and round about. So when we look at this, it's like, what do we actually have control over? We don't have control over the hot flushes. We don't have control over anxiety, but we do have control over our breath. So yes, you can change a mental pattern, you can rewire in terms of your thought patterns. Yes, you can sort of affect anxiety in that way. But from a point of view of the fact that it's from a nervous system point of view, we just want to step in and really go for it. We want to actually go, how can we change this feeling we're having right now sort of instantly? And that's only really tapped into through breath. So by retraining the breath all the time, you're able to reduce the amount of anxiety level you have all the time, just like you're increasing the tolerance to CO2 all the time. So they're all linked, especially with the upper chest breathing. If you take that away, that shallow, fast, excessive feeling. And then when we have a case of being able to slow down the breath, we're able to actually just step in and do the breath work when needed. So you have one layer of, are you breathing better for 20, 25,000, whatever number of breaths you're doing a day? And then is it a case of when you need to, like for me, it's premenstrually, that's when my my estrogen levels drop and I start to breathe a little bit faster, even though I don't always notice because it's just the new norm for the day, but I feel more anxious. And then I realize I'm breathing faster when I actually sort of tap into it. And so I have to do a lot more breath work. And then when you have the hot flush, often, just like with asthma attack, the hot flush is actually accompanied by effectively like a panic attack or an anxiety episode. And so you control the anxiety episode or the panic attack, and you are then therefore improving the scenario of the hot flush because you can reduce the severity.
A lot of what you're talking about in relation to anxiety and breath work is hacking the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. So I usually say, so the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress side, or the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. When you have the nervous system stage, it's kind of like how do I describe it? It's kind of like a sliding scale. There's not like always one side or the other side to feeling on this. It's almost like a staircase is how I call it. So if you're at the top of the staircase, you're either feeling highly stressed, highly anxious, having a panic attack, or noticing things in your body, even though you haven't actually associated the word with it, whether it's hot flushes, you wanting to take all your clothes off. Sometimes you get up before a sales call. It doesn't have to be menopausal to have a hot flush. So thinking about this high stress state in the body, if you can step it down the staircase gradually, you're gaining control. Then you can get right down to the nice calm bit at the bottom if you keep going. But getting people to understand that that is so possible, that you are able to take control, even in that moment where you're like, oh my God, what's going on? But rather than what's going on, it's like, oh, wow, I'm stressed. Let's get down this staircase, or let's get these buses going, or whatever it is that you like to think about. It's a case of, okay, just stop. And once we've stopped, we can start to actually do what we need to do. And that is so empowering. One of the things that I loved was I sent it to somebody the other day who has it's sort of enforced menopause because they had breast cancer. So they were younger maybe than the normal menopausal person, but they had this really strong problem. And what happened was they put on social media, and that's why I saw it, that they were having like such strong sweats that they were literally flooding their clothes in the supermarket.
Golly.
Like completely sopping wet. And this was happening multiple times a day as well. And it wasn't their norm. They didn't normally have this bad. So they were obviously quite sort of traumatized by this and really struggling. And I just sent them a particular breath work. I know they'd already started to work through the nose and they were being more conscious, but I sent this particular breath work, and it was a 5-minute audio. And she tried it and she was like, oh my gosh, I managed to stop my hot flush before I sweated out. And then she tried it the whole of the next day and sent me an audio, and just like, that's a game changer. I've been doing it all day and it's been so much better. I've not sweated out today at all.
Wonderful.
That's pretty special. So, I learn from my clients, and you've got to just, when you've got people who are willing to try, they reap the benefits. When they put the work in, it's incredible. And it's so, it's rewarding. It really is.
So a lot of my audience will really resonate with what you're saying about hot flushes and anxiety as a result of perimenopause. Do you have a particular intervention or breathing technique that you could share with us now, just to enable people to practice and learn more about the power of breathing?
Yeah, so what I can do for you is just basically describe through the concept of a very simple technique. When I teach it in the course, I do it via video, and it has audio as well, and that allows them to be completely guided through. What you basically need to do is, the first thing to do is stop breathing. So that is the most important part. If somebody's doing this and they stop breathing just for like 2 or 3 seconds, and not to think of it as a stop, but it's just a pause. It's just literally breathe in, breathe out, pause. And then when you start to breathe in again, it's breathing in much more consciously. So they're breathing in slower. So they thought stop, and now they thought slow. And once they're breathing in slower, they can calm that breathing down as much as they can, but knowing that they've still got quite a few steps on the staircase to go. And once they've done 5 or so breaths, they just pause again and they restart their breathing consciously again. And every time you restart, you start with a fresh slate. Whereas if you were going and someone says, just slow down your breathing, like, I can't. Whereas as soon as you go, and it might be hard to slow it down, it might feel like a challenge, but it is possible. And every time you pause and every time you restart, you can feel like you're taking that bit more control. So starting with the slowing it down, then it's the case of getting it to the right spot, which I call the D spot, the diaphragm. Most people don't breathe into the right spot. That's often the hardest bit for people to get. So those who use this technique straight away, they'll notice improvement, but those who can actually get to the D spot will notice even more because the control is so much better. So you step out of your upper chest into the D spot, which is just below the bra strap, in between the ribs, and bringing it into there, you're breathing into only that spot and no larger than that spot moves. So most people just think of low, which is fine. If you're a belly breather, which is generally the whole belly and quite often the lower belly, which is not what I teach, it's about the upper part. If you just breathe into that area, it's still better than the upper chest. It's not ideal breathing, but at least it's low. When you then get it to slow, then low, then you're getting to the point where you're actually reducing the air, as opposed to only doing the fast breathing at the beginning. And the last bit is just to get it quiet. So it's focusing on each step of the thing. So you stop, slow, stop, low, stop, quiet, and as many steps as you need in between.
It's very meditative. Incredible.
Yeah, it's really, really, it's so simple, but it's really good focus. A lot of people find that just knowing that helps them. Often the audio is really, really helpful because people like to be talked through it to learn it. And that's why I train with that. And then it's a case of actually going, but am I breathing better all the time? Can I stop it coming on in the first place? And that's the bit that is really powerful because you're not just dealing with the emergency the whole time.
And I mentioned breathing and meditation. And I know breathing has been part of pretty much every religion, Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism. Breathing is so inextricably linked. It seems to be a lost art. I'm just
Yes.
wondering why we haven't thought of using breathing as a natural healing remedy, and why doctors are very quick to prescribe rather than educating and encouraging us to focus on breath work.
I'd love to know the exact reason. I've read a number of books and articles on it. I think realistically, back in the day, people trusted, witch doctors and herbalists and that sort of thing. There was a kind of unaccredited, shall we say, area of people that knew some stuff that did help people. Some of it wasn't helping people, some of it was. They were all experimenting. And our breath we were aware of back then through much more, as you say, the meditative states, whether it's through religion, whether it's through sort of ritual practices, whatever it was in that community. And I think we've lost that community that we used to have, first of all, in modern day life. I think we've tried to put all healthcare into a label healthcare. So, people wanted to create a space that was doctors or people who had a certain knowledge, and obviously that brings some safety for people as well. So having a certain amount of especially because the body is very complex, breathing's quite simple, but the body is very complex. So we've kind of created these trusted professionals in the world, which they do a great job and they really care and they do everything they can. Quite frankly, they're probably the most unhealthy people as well, because we don't exactly let them work the hours they need to or give them the breaks they need. And from a well-being point of view, the medical industry is absolutely screwed. But from a they do understand the literature behind it. So what we're looking at here is we've got a number of layers. That's why we got there. Obviously, it used to be male only, and then women finally were allowed into it. So again, it was a change of gender control as well. There's a lot going on in the sort of health space, and I think we're now at a modern day science. Great, but we still got old practices and slow take up on things. So, you know, why is breathing not being taught to doctors as part of their training? They haven't got there yet. That's basically it. They'll get there one day, but they've not got there yet. And why do we go to specialists that deal with, you know, a particular part of the body when actually all the body's linked? And we should almost be going to like a panel of specialists that should all be looking at each person and thinking about the, you know, links. But that's not how the medical systems work. So whereas the well-being space is much more holistic. You know, if I'm looking at breathing, I'm not just looking at breathing. You know, I'm an awareness coach. I look at the awareness. I look at the menstrual cycle and the impact that has on the breathing, and the impact the breathing has on the menstrual cycle in terms of stress and everything else. So when we're looking at, you know, how we're operating in the day, you know, are we really thinking about everything combined? You know, how we slept, how we ate, how we moved, how we breathed. You know, it's all part of the puzzle, and you can't just focus on one area. And so, yes, breathing is the area that I'm passionate about because it's the area it's not being focused on. People get the other stuff. This is the new bit basically to them, but it's not new. It's been there for many, many years. It's just that people did it better, but then they didn't think that it was as important because that was normal. You know, your great grandparent might have gargled water or salt water. My grandpa did. How many of us now gargle with salt water at bedtime or, you know, in the morning? Probably very few. And yet gargling is great for the vagal nerve. Who knew? My grandpa wouldn't have known, but it would have been a habit that he did, that he learned from his parents and they learned from their parents. And so we've just dropped these habits, not knowing what benefit they had for us.
So you've just thrown in a whole nother topic, the vagus nerve. I mean,
Yes.
breathing, stimulating the vagus nerve is another hack into your system. And yeah, we could go on forever about things like that.
Yeah.
I just find it a shame that the first port of call for most women through menopause is your GP. And often that means HRT. And, you know, I'm a great supporter of HRT. I'm on HRT. However, I also know that to really support women through perimenopause, it's more than HRT. It is that holistic, total look at every part of your well-being and lifestyle. And in my own surgery, I was having a chat with a nurse the other day, and she said, I mentioned to her that I was a coach in menopause, and she said, "Oh, fantastic. I have so many women coming to me who don't know about perimenopause, and I don't feel equipped to be able to talk to them about it." And I'm thinking, gosh, if my nurse is if my nurse is telling me that, I'm like, what is my surgery doing more broadly? Nothing. And it's just such a shame that women want to learn, want to know more, but unless they know where to go, they have a very limited exposure to the possibilities of a holistic approach, including breathing. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, there's a double whammy there though. There's the side of the lack of education in the current medical system around well-being and holistic well-being and habits. It's more about habits, and quite frankly, they've got like 7 minutes to see you. They can't really help you with habits. They haven't got the time. It's not their job. Their job is to deal with the kind of urgent, like, you know, it's not a healthcare system, it's an illness system, you know. So when you are in a space where you have a problem, it doesn't matter whether it's menopause or not, it could be anything, but let's look at menopause. When you go in there, are the people going in actually willing to change how they live? And that is the real question. Are you just wanting a pill for whatever it is, but let's say it's in a hormone, you know, are you just wanting a pill to get it fixed effectively? Is that what you're looking for? Is that what you believe healthcare is? Is that what you've been fed by the pharmaceutical system and GPs, that you just need an inhaler, you need a pill, you need a jab or whatever? Or are you thinking, yeah, that might help either initially, or if the other things aren't going to work, or in you know, tandem with the other thing, but actually, how am I sleeping? How am I breathing? How am I eating? How am I moving? Can I sit on the floor? You know, can I get on and off the ground? Can I do these basic things with my body that really, no matter what age you are, you should be able to do? And so if you're not able to do that, have you got the mental space to deal with that right now? Or is it, give me the pill and I'll deal with it in like next year? Or is it a case of, you've got no time for yourself because you're working, 2 jobs, or you're a full-time carer and you're working. So it's not as simple, sadly, as just, have you gone to the right person? It's also like, are you ready to put in the work? Are you able to put in the work? And quite often most people don't put themselves first. So even if they do have time, they think they don't have time because they think they come below everything else. And that is a real issue for people trying to improve their health.
And that's where the likes of you and I come in, to raise people's awareness and give them opportunity to have choice over their actions. So tell me more about the work that you're doing around menopause. I know you've got some training and workshops coming up. I'd love to know more about what you're doing in the menopause space.
Yeah, so I'm not niching only to menopause. It's just an area that I cover because I see a range of people. But I basically just see that it helps so many different areas. So I'm kind of just saying, like, highlighting, going, hi, this is also here as an option. But what I'm trying to do at the moment is creating online packages, which are pre-recorded videos, but then with live support, so that you can actually get, like, I'm having this, I've tried this, but I'm struggling with that. And is this right? Can you see this? Some people just really need that one-to-one element within group calls. And so I've got these packages, and that will help people to understand, like, okay, so week 1, we look at this, and this is what we work on, and we look at this habit. And then week 2, we change this part about our breathing and our habit. And then week 3, we look at this, and just sort of hand holding through, understanding that, yes, you can do breath work. Breath work is great. And you can sit there for an hour and do yoga or something. It's not sit there and do yoga, but you know what I mean? You can do yoga or meditation for an hour or for half an hour, and they're brilliant, but they're not the full story. It's about using those when absolutely necessary, or when you really want to as a preemptive, as well as generally changing. And so it allows people to understand that, to teach through the basic science, some of which we've covered today, to teach through the concept of exactly how it should feel, what to look out for. If you're going to put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, yeah, but how? Where? What happens to my face? Should I be honest? How are we going to do that? And so it's the really minute details that are missing, even in the books, where you go, oh yeah, sure, just put my tongue in the roof of my mouth, or just do this. It's not as simple as that for a lot of people. They've got questions. And so this course takes people through that. So at the moment, I've already got an anxiety, asthma attack and panic attack course, which teaches everything they need to know, but I'm probably going to actually brand one for menopause soon, because I want people to realize it is also for them, and it's going to do what they need in terms of giving them just general better breathing, and then emergency hacks when they need it.
Fabulous. So where can people find out more about what you do and who you are?
Sure. So my website is Link Breathing, LINK, linkbreathing.co.uk. And that will have all the courses on there. I also do one-to-one coaching, which is more premium priced, but it is there as an option if people really want to have a little bit of one-to-one time as well. And I'm always on social media, so at Link Breathing, whether you're on LinkedIn, which is the space I'm usually hanging out, Instagram a little bit, occasionally Facebook and stuff, but generally I try to keep it either on the website or on LinkedIn as where I'm showing up the most.
And you do some fabulous videos. It's how you caught my eye on LinkedIn. So
I tried to do some fun ones, because quite frankly, there's some boring stuff on there. And then also the other side is just really trying to educate through snippet videos that just go, what do you mean this is actually a thing? It's not just in out, and just getting people to go, I didn't know that. And that's usually, I don't think I've ever met someone who knew everything I know about breathing. And even those in the space, I don't really speak to too many people in the space, because I obviously am my own lane doing my own thing. But I love that even those in the space, we have our areas we focus on, and we're all sort of doing different bits. But this particular area is, if you find something you didn't know about breathing, then this shows us a lot more we don't know, because we just weren't taught anything as kids.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I feel empowered, not only by reading James Nestor's book, but by connecting with you. And I'm more consciously aware of my breathing, and that can only be a good thing. So
Absolutely.
I'd encourage everybody to be more mindful of how they're breathing. And if they're not breathing through their nose, give it a go.
Absolutely.
It really works. It helps.
It's a good start. That's definitely the starting place to go to. Yeah, there's a lot more to it than just the nose, but it's definitely an amazing start.
Oh yeah, but it can't hurt to give it a go.
Not at all.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you very
Lovely
much.
speaking with you again. And I love the work you're doing. And I wish you all the best for those courses around menopause. I think women will find it incredibly empowering and useful, particularly in the middle of a hot flash or a bit of a panic attack.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Lovely to reconnect again.
Thank you, Jane. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.
Bye.